or raising your voice or pushing someone off or ignoring them in the office. There's all these types of behaviors that all generate from a person gossiping. And they were talking about how if there was one thing they really despised most about being in the office, it was gossiping. And they didn't understand why certain people were prone to that and other people weren't. I'm not sure if you've ever really paid attention in the Gospels about how many people really gossip about Jesus. It happens all the time. They're talking about him in front of him, behind his back. They're talking about the deeds that he's doing, right, which are obviously God's empowerment into his son so that people would believe what he was saying because his actions and his words have a really close correlation. So Jesus is doing nothing but good. He's only speaking about trying to raise people up, freeing them from, religious enslavement, trying to get them into a proper relationship with God. He's trying to challenge the leaders to see things differently, and his actions, his deeds, driven by faith, are restoring people and restoring sight and hearing and everything else. And yet, in a very real way, Jesus is really the victim of gossiping. People, even though he is doing only the right things, people are gossiping about Jesus. But the greatest of all the gossip shows up in our gospel today, and I'm not even sure we pay attention to it. It happens, and it's very real, and it's very pointed. And for Jesus to hear this probably would have been the most painful thing for him to hear. And I'm not sure we actually understood it or get this. So let me just read a section, and you tell me where you think it might be. They said of him, "Where did this man get all of this? What kind of wisdom has he been given? What mighty deeds are wrought by his hands? Is he not the carpenter, the son of Mary, and the brother of James and Joseph, Judas, and Simon? Are not his sisters here with us?" And they took offense at him. Now remember, Jesus is in Nazareth. He returns home, returns to his town. These people know about him. They also know that his mother is found to be with child before she marries Joseph. The gossip that is probably most painful to Jesus here is the fact that they're taking on his mom. And they're doing this because if you notice, it is really pointed, and only if you understood the culture of the time, a male would never be identified as being the son of a woman. In Jesus' time, it was a patriarchal society. So it was about male to male to male to male. So they would have said, "Is he not the carpenter, the son of Joseph?" But they don't. They pull her into it because they know that there is this question about the legitimacy of Jesus and that his mother was found to be with child before Joseph and Mary lived together. We pass over this and we think it's just scripture, and yet at this very same way, as much as it is a really glaring shot at Jesus about the gossip that was going on about him. And their way of diminishing him was questioning his heritage, his lineage, and by pointing out that Mary was found to be with child before he moved in with Joseph. I bring this up because it is really interesting here that Jesus doesn't address any of that. And every single time in the scriptures that people bring to him this situation, there's another part in scripture where Mary and his brothers are outside the crowd. They've come to take him away. And Jesus says, they say to him, your mother and your brothers are outside. And Jesus switches immediately to say, anyone who does the will of my Father is mother, brothers, father, and whatnot to me. Jesus here does not address any of this. Instead, he goes into the main reason he is there, and that is to see whether or not he can muster enough faith in those people around him to actually for him to be able to produce deeds and to drive them into a deeper relationship with God. And so I'm not sure whether or not this is intentional or not, but in the midst of gossip, which is really very flagrant now, right? Social media, you got to be really careful what you watch on some of this stuff, because there's a good percentage of it, probably a large percentage of it, that's really just not true. It's just not real. It doesn't have any fact behind it at all, and yet people throw this around all the time. I said to Donna a couple weeks ago that some actor had died. She's like, "What are you talking about?" "Yeah, I saw it. I saw it on social media." Well, that actor never died. It was just someone trying to get attention to their site, to their posts, by saying that poor guy died. Now, can you imagine that guy getting up and seeing online that he died, and saying to himself, "Well, that's not true. I'm right here." But people are doing this type of stuff all the time to get one-upsmanship on someone else. And I want to go back to the fact that Jesus must have been terribly pained by the fact that they dragged his mother into the fight. And yet Jesus does not address that. He stays focused on calling out their lack of faith. And maybe there's a lesson there for us about taking a higher road. Because if Jesus would have engaged, what possibly would have come about? What good would have come about through the midst of all that? And as much as it hurt him, there were things, there were values that he felt were more important than defending his mother's right or her dignity. For Jesus, it was all about taking a higher road. And I think for us, we have to ask ourselves whether we are ones who are prone to gossip or not. And if we are, we want to ask ourselves, what is it about gossiping that we feel legitimizes ourselves or empowers us in some way? Because we could be doing that without even realizing that by gossiping, you become the center of attention for a short period of time. And some people are really driven to simply being the center of attention. We want to take a look and see whether or not we are the ones that are gossiping. And we might dismiss it and say, well, there's nothing Christian, there's nothing scriptural about that. And yet here we have Jesus's mother, being wrung out because of the fact that she gave birth to him. And I do think there is something for us as Christians we should reflect upon and review in our own actions about whether we are the source of gossip. If we are the recipients of gossip, I find incredible value in the fact that Jesus himself suffers from gossip and yet dismisses it. He doesn't engage it. He doesn't give it any type of credibility. He simply continues doing what he knows is the best that he can do. He chooses a higher path. He chooses a higher road. He chooses a different road than simply trying to engage in a battle over this. And, when I left the Friars, and especially when I came here to Eastchester, there was a lot of talk, There was a lot of talk about the fact that I had left the Friars and came here. There was a lot of talk about the fact that I had married Donna after the fact. There was a lot of talk about having Arthur and having a family. And somewhere in the midst of all that, as painful as it is to reflect upon the fact that people are talking about you, there's a part of me that I've become really sort of very comfortable in allowing it simply to be and not allowing myself to waste energy. Because the one thing that the group at the barbecue was talking about was how exhausting it was to engage in the gossip, to try to maintain the course, to try to keep up with all the latest stuff that's happening, to be on the in, and really how the negativity drained them of their energy and all of that. And I think for us, like Jesus, we have to choose where we're going to go and where we're going to put our energy. And I think Jesus, in the midst of this gossip around his mom, which must have been just incredibly painful because no one likes anyone talking about our family, especially not our parents. And as painful as this was, he chose to bypass it, to overlook it, and simply continue being who he was authentically. I think that's the lesson for us today. Are we a source of gossip? Are we the creation of gossip? Are we the ones who find that we find value in gossiping? We have to ask ourselves why. And if we're hurting others, we're responsible for that. And then at the same time, if we're the recipient of gossip, there has to be a point in time where we simply determine when we're going to engage, what is worth our time, what is worth our energy. It doesn't make you any better than anyone else to do that, but we all have limited amount of time and energy to ourselves. And I think we should be very selective about where we put that time, where we put that energy. Because every time you're putting time and energy in one thing, you're skipping something else that even could be so much more valuable to us than engaging in this. But somehow we feel that if people are gossiping, we need to gossip. And the way we get equal is by gossiping about it. It's a vicious cycle and circle. But the point at that picnic that I eavesdropped on, the conversation, about how they found that it really drained them of their energy, is something that I think we should give consideration to. Maybe it's not worth being involved in listening to gossip and engaging in gossip because it absorbs a part of our time and energy that really honestly could be spent on something else. And clearly, in Jesus' view, that's exactly what he did. God bless you.